Hey, so for legal reasons, I should probably put this here. Hey, everybody. The following is a fictional podcast. None of it is true. Also, I am not sponsored by Manscaped or Simply Safe or anybody. This isn't sponsored at all. This is I guess you could look at this as both an homage to Five Nights at Freddy's and also partially a satirization of true crime. I've tried my best, though, to genuinely accurately portray this concept. I should also give a big shout out to Queen Marcy on YouTube, who came up with this initial idea that inspired this and who is also featured in this as one of the characters. A full list of credits will be in the description, and they should also be on screen right now. And yeah, thank you to everybody who helped with this. This has been a long time in the works, and enjoy listening. Welcome to the Hurricane 5, a true crime podcast. I'm Dan Sasso. For the past 2 weeks, I was living in a motel just outside Hurricane, Utah. It's a quiet, unassuming town, but there's an often overlooked story that still casts a dark shadow on the residents of Hurricane. It's a story of mourning, frustration, of unserved justice. It's about a killer who got away. But most of all, it's a story about people, about community, and about loss. So for this next hour or so, let me take you through the story, as I experienced it, of the Hurricane Stranger and the disappearance of the Hurricane 5. I was first introduced to this story about 2 months ago. I got an email from someone who wishes to remain anonymous, who's connected to the case through family. Hey Dan, I've got a story for you. I hope I'm not wasting your time. I live in Hurricane, Utah. It's been a long time since people really talked about this, but some kids went missing here back in the 90s, and it was a huge deal in the area. As he detailed the case, I could feel myself leaning forward in my seat, completely intrigued by each new detail. His email felt almost apologetic, worried that he was wasting my time, but by the time I finished reading, I knew I had to dig deeper. And so I did. I spent the next month finding every archived newspaper, every news story, every possible connection online. I scheduled for interviews, reached out to as many people as I could, and finally, about 3 weeks ago, I booked a flight and a motel to Hurricane, Utah. Okay, so I'm sitting here in the hotel room, or I guess motel room. It's a little smaller than I thought it would be. I tried bringing up the story, just casual conversation, for why I was staying here. I tried bringing it up to the person at the front desk. He did not want to talk about it. So let me set the stage. It's a mid-October night in Hurricane, Utah. Just a few blocks down from the movie theater, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a local children's pizzeria and arcade similar to Chuck E. Cheese's, is about to become a crime scene. Trevor Williams, only 11 years old, is missing. His parents search with the help of staff for an hour before contacting the police. When they arrive, the police don't take the situation seriously from the start, taking a half-hearted sweep of the building that turns up nothing. After questioning the staff and other patrons, the police determined Trevor was last seen near the front end of the building, where the entrance and exit is. So, the investigation moves outside, the police believing Trevor had just wandered into the parking lot. Let me paint a quick picture for you of the layout. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza sits pretty squarely in one of those outdoor mini-mall complexes. There's no real alleyways or hidden crevices. Outside of Freddy's is pretty much just a big parking lot, and a well-lit one at that. So the idea that Trevor was somehow invisible or hidden to the police when they arrived, while still being close by, seems pretty ridiculous. But that's how the investigation unfolded. The officers walked the parking lot for a few minutes, checked behind a couple dumpsters, and checked if any of the other businesses were open at this time of night, and if Trevor had wandered into any of those. None of them were, all locked up tight. Now the police begin to take this situation seriously, but as we'll see, not seriously enough. Okay, I think this is the tape.
A show? where the food and fun are all there.
Alrighty then. It's not very well taken care of tape, I guess. I should probably mention this before we move on. The actual place this disappearance happened, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, did not have the cleanest reputation to start with. More specifically, what it had been before it was known as Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. In the late 80s, during the real height of Showbiz Pizza and Chuck E. Cheese, the spot where Freddy's now is used to be called Fredbear's Family Diner. And what Fredbear's is most known for is the death of a little girl, which is still unsolved to this day. It shut down after that, and a new company, Utah Games and Attractions, bought the place up and rebranded it as it is now known today, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, in 1991. We'll talk more about that unsolved murder because it does have shocking relevance as the story goes on, but for now, the important thing to note is this. When the news got out that Trevor was missing, the residents of Hurricane started getting a terrible feeling of déjà vu. The police would not form a more large-scale search for Trevor until the morning of the next day, although according to some it was closer to the afternoon before anything really got started. While fear and anxiety and frustration with the police response seemed to be the overwhelming feelings of the volunteer members of this search felt, there was a sense of solidarity in the community during this time. A local newspaper interviewed a member of the search party who said, "We were up all day and night searching for him. A lot of good people took time out of their days, missing jobs and for the younger ones, school. Most people didn't even know him. It was a good group of people. I wish we would have found him." The search continues for 2 weeks straight. It's no longer considered a rescue mission, instead, a body recovery. Many of the volunteers become exhausted and the numbers dwindled, and eventually, even the official police investigation became frustratingly quiet. Even now, we know very little about what steps the Hurricane police were taking to find Trevor, or at the very least figure out what happened to him. Was he kidnapped? Was there an accident? Did he run away at 11 years old? If he was kidnapped, were there any suspects? Nobody knew anything. The case would remain quiet until January of 1995. And it wasn't good news.
More updates now about the disappearances of 4 children: Sally Garcia, Nadia Lee, and Donald and Nicholas Schaefer. This comes 4 months after the disappearance of Trevor Williams, whose case we have not heard news about since mid-November. Police confirm that they believe the disappearance of Trevor Williams and the 4 who are now missing are in fact connected, and they strongly suspect foul play.
A birthday party. Again, another late night at Freddy's, the last business open in the area. The parents of 4 children leave their kids at the restaurant to be watched by the employees for 3 hours. When the parents arrive to pick their children up, the 4 children are nowhere to be found. The police are called only 5 minutes later. No one is waiting around again after Trevor Williams. The police arrive on the scene only 20 minutes after the parents arrived. Again, the police sweep the premises and find nothing. More officers are called in, immediately turning Freddy's into a crime scene and sending more officers searching for something, anything in the surrounding area. But due to very spotty witness statements, it's unclear how long the children have actually been missing. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. And after a full night of investigation, searching, and questioning, there's nothing. Sally Garcia, Nadia Lee, and Donald and Nick Schaefer have disappeared without a trace. Much like the Trevor Williams case before it, it doesn't take long for the police to go quiet. Rumors and media speculation take the place of official statements. Freddy's is closed indefinitely and police cars are parked outside 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Unfortunately, as noted by many, the place seemed empty of investigators for most of that time. I wish I could defend the Hurricane PD at this point. I wish I could tell you how hard they were working behind closed doors, but the truth is, I have no idea. No one does. Their silence could be for legal reasons, trying to work as efficiently as possible and avoid any complications, or it could be because they had nothing and were just parking those cars outside for show. But unless the Hurricane police make a statement, we don't know. Because of this long silence from police, the restless and afraid residents of Hurricane took it upon themselves to do something. Aside from the rampant rumors and media speculation coming up with possible suspects, almost all of which were based on crackpot conspiracy theories and no actual evidence, other people found more productive ways to deal with the situation. Community fundraisers for the parents of the missing children, new school safety regulations, and a wave of stranger danger programs, something that Hurricane was all too familiar with before. After a month, the police detail outside of Freddy's quietly disappears. Freddy's is still closed, but it seems that law enforcement don't have anything else to do there. More than a few employees quit, leaving Freddy's understaffed, and the management understands this is no time to put out job offerings. So Freddy's sits quiet and dormant, much like the case itself. And after another month, Freddy's begins preparing to open its doors again, with what little staff it has left. And while cleaning out some of the back rooms, an employee finds something. Stuck inside of a spare animatronic band member's head, there's a shoe. For the first time, the police actually have something to say. The shoe did in fact belong to Sally Garcia, and was the exact one she was wearing the night she disappeared. This begins to give them a picture of what happened, and during a town hall, they detail what they believe took place.
Okay, this is the recording of the town hall meeting. The tape looks really beat up, so I'm hoping it will play all right. I guess, here we go. Here goes nothing. Okay then.
Unfortunately, the only recording of the town hall I was able to find is completely unintelligible, so I'll read from the transcript that was provided along with it. We believe that the 4 children in question were led to this back room, which is where they initially disappeared. We currently do not have an individual in custody, but this piece of evidence has significantly narrowed our list. That's Chief William Harris. The police now believed whoever was responsible for these disappearances was an employee of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. That alone was more than anyone had heard since Trevor Williams disappeared in October. But there was one more outstanding piece of evidence. Stuck to the shoe itself were fibers of gold synthetic fur. The significance of that may be lost on you, so let me explain. The animatronic band of characters at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza consists of a brown bear, a blue rabbit, and a yellow chicken. Aside from just having the characters on stage, like many of these character-based children's pizzerias, there are suits of these mascots that the employees can wear. These fibers belong to one of those characters, leading police to believe that whoever did this had lured the children into the back room while dressed in that suit, likely to gain trust. But these fibers weren't from a brown bear. They weren't from a blue rabbit. They were gold. The immediate thought would be to point to the yellow chicken. And it's true, the fibers were consistent with the synthetic fur used in lieu of feathers on parts of that character's suit. But they were also consistent with 2 other characters. Back when Freddy's was known as Fredbear's Family Diner, there were only 2 characters. One was a golden bear, and the other was a golden rabbit. And the fur used on the chicken suit was the exact same as the ones used on those old characters. This opened up a whole new possibility. Those suits, those older animatronic characters, were no longer stored in the building. They hadn't been for years. So they could have belonged to someone from outside, using one of these 80s era suits. To this day, it's unknown what character those fibers belonged to. After the discovery of Sally Garcia's shoe, the case began moving faster than anyone in Hurricane was used to. Suddenly, every week there was something new. The police announced they had 2 suspects, then just 1, in custody. They assured the public that within the month, they would have an answer to what happened to the 5 missing children of Hurricane, and the one responsible would be brought to justice. And then, they released him. Lack of evidence. And that was the last we heard, officially, from anyone about the case. That's a frustrating end to the story, isn't it? I know what you wanted, what I wanted. The big reveal. Justice finally being brought. The children finally found, the families finally having closure. The person who did this behind bars. That's how these things are supposed to end. But it isn't. Not this time. Sometimes, life is just cruel and disappointing. And I think that's why it's so hard for people to talk about it. I spent weeks reaching out to as many people involved in this case as I could, asking for interviews, looking to learn about what happened from a first-hand experience. But I would say about 90% of the people I reached out to declined to be interviewed. No police officer or investigator would talk about it. None of the parents of these missing children wanted to. Any friends, families, relatives, hell, even acquaintances of these people did not want to talk about it. And while that may make my job harder, I get it. There's no happy ending here. What else can they say besides, "It sucks, I miss them, and he got away"? I'm grateful to the few people who agreed to speak with me. It really helped me fill in the gaps and added a human perspective, but I understand why so many didn't want to talk about it. At the same time, I still feel like I need to tell this story. This silence on the subject has meant that the memory of the event and those victims of it have slowly faded. Much of the younger generation in the town doesn't even know it happened. So I want to take some time to remember those 5 children. Trevor Williams lived just outside of Hurricane, in a town called New Harmony. He went to school in Hurricane and was a star soccer player even at age 11. According to the very few statements his parents have made over the years, his biggest dream would be to play in the World Cup someday. He even called it football because that's what the rest of the world called it. Sally Garcia was the top of her class, but known to her teachers as a troublemaker. She had a strong sense of independence even from a young age. It was her 8th birthday when she went missing. Nadia Lee was known as Sally's partner in crime. You couldn't separate the two. In 1999, Nadia's parents said they wanted her to be remembered as a hardworking, determined friend who was well liked by everyone and made friends wherever she went. Donald Schaefer was also one of Sally's friends. The two of them played softball together, and Donald was the best pitcher on the team, according to his coach. He was homeschooled, along with his younger brother, Nick. Nick and Donald Schaefer were best friends. Donald had insisted that Nick be invited to the birthday too, as their older sister detailed in a 2003 interview. Nick was an artist, and even at age 6, was drawing realistic portraits of everything and everyone around him. While I understand the impulse to push away from topics like this, from unresolved sadness, the collective trauma of something like this, I think we owe it to these kids not to forget. This episode of the Hurricane 5 is sponsored by Manscaped. Men, are you giving the proper care that your nether regions deserve? Caring for your family jewels requires the proper equipment, and disposable razors just aren't gonna cut it. There is nothing, and I mean nothing in life worse than accidentally nicking yourself while shaving. That's where Manscaped's new Hair Killer 5.0 comes in. Get a perfect cut, trim, whatever you need every time. Use our code TheHurricane5 at checkout for 25% off your order. There is still more to this story. I've hardly touched on the suspects. In fact, I never even mentioned names, let alone any reason they might have been suspected. And that was for a reason. Like I'd mentioned early on, before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was Fredbear's Family Diner. Started in 1987 by Henry Goodman, an entrepreneur and engineer who had previously worked with Showbiz Pizza, Fredbear's Family Diner was created as a singular restaurant in his hometown of Hurricane. The place almost seemed doomed from the start. After only 2 months of being open, an accident occurred with some of the animatronic robots' hydraulics, leading to permanent brain damage for David Harris, an engineering student and part-time employee at Fredbear's. In the end though, by 1989, the place was generally viewed positively by the community. It was a popular place for birthday parties, and Henry Goodman was somewhat of a local celebrity, beating Showbiz Pizza and Chuck E. Cheese to the punch in Hurricane. On December 12th, 1989, Patrick Dominic was working a full shift at Fredbear's, making pizza for a birthday party. Even in the middle of December, the back room of that stuffy kitchen can get pretty hot. Patrick steps out into the cool December air and lights up a cigarette. And it takes him a second to notice, but there, lying on the ground, motionless, is 7-year-old Charlotte Goodman, Henry Goodman's daughter. Police arrive on the scene at 2 p.m., and their first lead is pretty immediately clear. Tire tracks are clearly visible from a fresh coat of icy compact snow that had fallen earlier in the morning. Following these tracks leads them just out of town, where the car those tracks belong to sits still running, a purple Chevy. Whoever the driver was has abandoned it. The police eventually track the owner as Sal Russo. However, when questioned, He explains that he had reported it stolen a few hours before the murder, and evidence in the car suggests it had been hot-wired. Aside from that, they find nothing else of worth. Some shoe prints at the scene come back inconclusive. The case goes back to the crime scene. The coroner concludes that Charlotte's cause of death was strangulation. This means that there are special obstacles with the investigation. There's no blood or weapon or other more immediate object that the police can get information from, and the lack of identifiable fingerprints means the investigation has very little to go on. It's believed from evidence at the scene that this was done on a whim, and while the few signs of struggle could suggest it was someone Charlotte knew, there was also the possibility it just happened quickly before Charlotte could run. Again, we're running into a theme here, a frustrating lack of information. The police had no suspects, and like with all the other cases so far, eventually it went cold. Henry Goodman sold the restaurant in 1990 and moved out of Hurricane, and as with the 1994 and 1995 cases that would follow it, the vacuum of information left by police was filled with endless media speculation. The unknown culprit of these acts was nicknamed the Tire Track Killer, the Purple Car Killer, and most unsettling to me, Happy Face, named after a small yellow smiley face sticker found at the scene. While initially detailed by police as possibly relating to the murderer, it was later dismissed as irrelevant evidence. But the name stayed around for a while. However, by far the most well-known name for this mysterious killer is the Stranger of Hurricane. Remember earlier when I talked about how there was a huge resurgence in the Stranger Danger campaigns around Hurricane after Trevor Williams disappeared? The death of Charlotte Goodman was the first wave. Stranger Danger, Hurricane Stranger, the name stuck. Outside of the endless speculation of who did it, how, and when, a new rumor began cropping up about Fredbear's itself, and eventually Freddy Fazbear's Pizza once it opened in the same building in 1991, that it was haunted.
Welcome. This is it. Home to fantasy and fun.
That's Jessica Patrick. She's currently the assistant manager at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and she was kind enough to show me around and talk about some of the history and rumors around Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. It was a few hours before opening, and the sun was just coming up. The chairs were still upside down on their tables, the floor was freshly cleaned, the scent of cleaner still strong. The animatronic character sat off to one wall, staring into nothing, unmoving and unbothered. It was eerie, not just knowing what had taken place here so many years ago now, but something about seeing the place empty and pristine is unsettling.
Actually, being here, in the space, I understand why people say it's haunted.
That's what everyone says. It's not great for business, obviously. We've actually had a few amateur ghost hunters come through here.
Oh, really?
Yep. Had to kick them out, though, because they didn't have any kids. And they were creeping out the other customers.
Do you know if they found anything?
No, I don't believe they did.
I want to make a point here to say I am not endorsing this theory that the place is haunted. It feels disrespectful to entertain something so sensationalized and, well, quite frankly, unprovable. But I can't say I don't understand it. The tragic history was almost palpable in the air. Maybe it was just the time of day and the place being so empty. Maybe it was those creepy animatronic eyes staring at me. But Jessica would like to make something very clear.
Look, this place is not haunted. If ghosts exist, they're not here. It's very tragic what happened all those years ago, but there hasn't been an incident since, and families still love to come here and spend time every single day. The idea that something that happened back in the 90s still reflects what it's like to be here now is not just disrespectful, but it's incorrect.
Oh, by the way, I was able to track those amateur ghost hunters down. They have a slightly different view of what happened while they were there.
I think we were kicked out because they're more worried about their reputation than they are the truth.
That's Parker Brown, or that's what he goes by, one of the two guys who runs the Paranormal Utah Investigations channel on YouTube. He disguises his voice and name to remain anonymous after he got into trouble with authorities a few years back, breaking into an abandoned hospital to go ghost hunting. Here's a clip from the video they recorded at Freddy's. Parker seems to be the one filming, holding his phone down near his chest, and his partner, who also wishes to remain anonymous, is holding an EMF detector, a device supposedly capable of detecting spiritual activity, under the table.
Dude, look. The EMF is way higher than what it just was. Look at that, dude. We got close to the stage, it's going crazy now. Oh shit.
Hey, you need to leave right now!
And that was Jessica Patrick kicking them out.
I think the idea that spirits exist in or around Freddy's, I think it's completely plausible, and I don't think it's at all disrespectful to suggest that. I mean, ghosts or apparitions typically appear in places that have undergone a great tragedy. Does that not fit Freddy's? I'm not saying it was less of a tragedy. I'm saying it was more of a tragedy. How is that disrespectful?
Say what you will about Parker, a lot of people seem to agree with him. The comments in his video are filled with people claiming to also be from Hurricane. One reads, "That place always scared me, even when I was little. Went there for a birthday party in 2002, and I swear I saw those robot fuckers staring at me the whole time. Defo believe it's haunted." And then there's a 100 emoji. Whatever you believe, it's impossible to ignore this rumor when talking about what happened. You can form your own opinions about it. I'm just here to report the facts. Aside from this idea that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was haunted, there's something very important about taking this step back. Because very quickly after Trevor Williams disappeared in 1994, the idea that whoever killed Charlotte Goodman was the same culprit took hold. And as this story continues, that idea will seem more and more likely. There is very little we know about Charlotte Goodman's killer, but here's what we do know. He hijacked a car. He committed a crime at Fredbear's Family Diner, the same building that would soon become Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He left very little physical evidence, and then he mysteriously disappeared. Now that we have some context around the history of Freddy's and Fredbear's, I think it's a good time to jump forward and talk about the suspects of the disappearances at Freddy's, and why eventually the police let them all go, starting with Henry Goodman. While Henry was never an official suspect considered by the police didn't do a very good job of filling the media void during their investigation, and so one of the first big theories that circulated in the media was this idea that Goodman was the culprit. The logic on the surface makes sense. After Fredbear's closure, Henry Goodman disappeared from the public eye, moving away from Hurricane. He seemed completely done with Fredbear's and all the trauma that carried. As one article put it, he was a broken man. The idea is that this break was really more of a snap. When he saw that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was opening, essentially trying to sweep the history under the rug in order to keep the business going, he went back to exact revenge, hoping that Trevor Williams' disappearance would be enough to shut Freddy's down, as his own daughter's murder had led to the closing of Fredbear's. But it didn't, and so Henry upped the ante, next going after the 4 children in 1995. Or at least, that was the idea. In reality, it held no standing. Not only was Henry Goodman nowhere near Hurricane anytime close to the 2 disappearances, people close to him who've chosen to comment have said that he wasn't actually upset about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza's opening. He was the one who set up the acquisition deal with Utah Games and Attractions, and was happy to see his idea continue even without him being involved. And so, in the end, the Henry Goodman theory doesn't hold much water. But the police's silence on a suspect would eventually be broken, and the next suspect we're talking about seems considerably more likely. Charles Blum was, for a short time, actually held in custody by police. A 17-year-old employee at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, he was working the night of the 1995 disappearances, and he was unaccounted for by staff for a long period of time, at least 2 hours according to some. His alibi was that he was outside smoking pot, which he claimed would explain him being so secretive about it, but no one could corroborate this claim. The police ended up letting him go for a few reasons. First, although he was missing for almost 2 hours, for the timeline to match up, he would have had to kidnapped or killed the 4 missing children and covered the whole thing up perfectly in a 15-minute window, which the police thought was improbable. Second, he had an alibi for the disappearance of Trevor Williams in 1994. He wasn't in town then, and wouldn't get hired at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza until 2 months later. And thirdly, he had no clear motive whatsoever. By all accounts, he was an average teenager with no previous record or signs of violent behavior. So in the end, the police let him go. Really, my discussing these other suspects should be seen as context, because the person who is really important I haven't mentioned yet. And I've tried to stay as impartial as possible when telling this story, but I think the better thing here is to admit my biases at the get-go. I think this guy did it. I don't think there's any other explanation, and I think he's guilty as hell. And once I've outlined the case against him, a case made by police, by the media, and by the investigative work of myself and my research team, I can only assume you'll agree. Dave Miller. Born in Hurricane in 1966, his parents were well-to-do but not ultra-wealthy. But despite his seemingly stable home life, in his childhood and teenage years he had a lot of issues, most times related to his own inappropriate behavior. Most report he didn't have many, if any, friends, and that he had a difficult time in social situations. He tried joining clubs in high school, but was kicked out for various reasons. By all accounts, he just had a hard time getting along with his fellow classmates. His behavior starts raising even more red flags at age 19, when he hijacked a car and drove to Arizona before being caught and sentenced to 2 years in prison. If you'll recall, this isn't the first time you've heard about a carjacking on this show. But so far, it could still be a coincidence. And after he was released, he moved right back in with his parents in Hurricane. And at 22, would you guess where he was hired? Fredbear's Family Diner. He worked there from 1988 to its eventual closure in 1989. It's important noting that most sources say he wasn't actually at work on the day of Charlotte Goodman's murder, and police initially had ruled him out on the original 1989 case because of this. But it does give him a direct connection to the location. And again, if you'll remember, it was this exact case that involved the culprit hijacking a car, much like Dave had done roughly 3 years prior. But eventually, Fredbear shut down. And when it reopened as Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1991, Dave was brought back on. To be fair, he was actually one of 4 employees who moved over, but by 1993, he was only one of 2 who still worked there. And just 1 year later, in 1994, Trevor Williams went missing. And then Sally, Donald, Nikki, and Nadia only a few months later. Dave was off work on the days of both sets of disappearances. This is essentially the case the police had to work with. Even with so much pointing to Dave, it still isn't an airtight case. But more information would eventually come out, either through rumors or people who knew Dave personally, that would begin to capture a more clear picture of Dave. A previous classmate of Dave said in an interview, "One day after school, he had just been kicked out of a robotics club, and I was walking by and saw him poking at this dead bird with a stick or something. I don't know if he had just found it or killed it, but especially after his behavior, the stuff he was doing to get kicked out in the first place, I was really creeped out by that guy. I think they got the right guy." There was a leaked internal memo from inside the police station that stated that Dave's carjacking in 1985 bore a striking resemblance to that of the carjacking involved in the 1989 murder of Charlotte Goodman. There was even a rumor spread that Dave had been stealing from Fredbear's during its time between 1989 and 1991, and that may have been the cause behind the large amount of outstanding items and missing supplies that Utah Games and Attractions noted in an internal report after acquiring Fredbear's in 1990, which would eventually leak after the 1995 disappearances. All of this paints a picture of a man with a clear ability, history, and character to be a prime suspect, and with little other possible answers, it seems to me and hundreds of others during this case that Dave was the culprit. So when much of this information came out after Dave was taken into custody by police, the public felt relief. We got him. Even the police initially seemed confident. But we know that's not how it panned out. Soon after he was taken into custody, he was released, and for once, the police had something to say about it, but it almost seemed more infuriating than if they had just stayed silent. The police were unwilling to take into account the connection between the 1989 murder of Charlotte Goodman and the disappearances of 1994 and 95, despite by their own admittance the striking resemblance of the two cases. So instead, they let the case go cold and released the only real suspect of substance. A week after Dave's release, he booked it out of town and moved to Nevada, where he still lives to this day. Officially, that's the end of this case. And it feels like, for the people of Hurricane, the story ends here too. The community was just too exhausted to keep holding out hope. And so for this chapter of the case, that's where it ends. But I wasn't quite done. There's so much information here, so much to sift through. As I learned all of this, I felt things getting jumbled up, cross-referencing sources and trying to put things together into a proper timeline of events. And I also have one more interview that I think will shed a lot of light on this case. This episode of the Hurricane 5 is sponsored by Simply Safe. Listening to true crime can make anyone paranoid. And guess what? There's a reason for that. The world outside is a scary place. Simply Safe's all-in-one home security platform is easy to install and will keep you safe from everything from package thieves to serial killers. Maybe if Freddy Fazbear's had had Simply Safe, things would have turned out differently. Go to simplysafe.com/hurricane5 to get 15% off Simply Safe's security doorbell kit. What first intrigued me about this story when I picked it up was how large it was in scale and yet how little information there actually was about it, at least on the surface. 5 disappearances and a murder all taking place within 6 years at the same place and widely believed to be by the same culprit. And yet, Aside from a very brief media bubble during the few months after the case occurred, it doesn't seem to have had a lasting impact. No national spotlight, and the people of Hurricane seem that they'd rather just forget. The next thing that intrigued me was how little actual physical evidence was left behind. A hot-wired car, a few inconclusive footprints, a shoe, and a fiber of yellowish fur. Really, that's it. Of course, there's circumstantial evidence that strongly points Dave Miller's way, but the fact remains, 5 of the 6 victims have still never been found. And finally, the thing that both frustrated and fascinated me is that the police let Dave Miller go. Let me emphasize the case against him again. He was an antisocial troublemaker who worked at both locations at the time of all the incidents, was conveniently off work at the time of all these incidents, with no real alibi. He had a history of carjacking in the past, which is associated with the first case at Fredbear's. He was one of only a few employees who worked at both Fredbear's and Freddy's, and he apparently had an adept knowledge of how to get in and out of the building undetected if the rumor of him stealing from Fredbear's while it was abandoned is true. And yet, they let him go. Now, to be fair, there are 2 camps regarding the police's investigation. Their critics say there couldn't be a more obvious explanation. Their silence only made their investigation harder, and letting him get away didn't just skip out on justice, but put possible future victims at risk. I tend to agree with this camp. But their defenders point out that while it seems pretty obvious that Dave Miller is guilty, there's no real way to prove it. Everything is circumstantial or simply nudges you in that direction. Nothing definitively proves it on its own. And it's true, somehow, whoever did it left behind almost no real evidence. The 5 children who disappeared barely left a trace, and to this day, no one has any idea where they actually are. That's a big question that's bugged me this whole time. Where are they? Charlotte Goodman's killer hardly left a trace of himself, and the disappearances in the 90s left even less. Most presume they're dead, and I'll be honest, I'm not optimistic either, but you'd think they found something. Just a shoe and a few fibers. It's frustrating. And that lack of information has followed me the entire time I've spent covering this story. From the police's silence to the comparatively small media coverage to the people of Hurricane themselves. Many don't know the details themselves or just don't want to talk about it. I reached out to officers who worked on the case, members of the search parties, friends, family. Almost no one wanted to talk. They either didn't respond or declined to speak with me. Until the day before I left. I had reached out to Trevor Williams' mother a few times with no response. Emails, phone calls. I had hoped to speak with her in person, but I had resigned myself to not speaking with any family directly involved in the case, and my plane left tomorrow. And then I got a text back from Tamara Williams, Trevor's mother. She didn't want to meet in person, but was willing to make a phone call. So after a few more messages, I dialed her number.
Hello?
Hey, Tamara. How are you? Thank you for agreeing to talk to me.
Yes, sure. There are some questions I will not be answering. I hope that's okay. But I'm not going to be answering things I don't feel comfortable with.
Yep, of course. If there's something you don't want me to answer, I can just skip to the next question. Okay. Sorry. Okay, here. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, do you think Dave Miller is guilty?
I'm going to skip that one.
All right. What are your feelings on the police's investigation of your son's disappearance?
They did not communicate with me. Or any of the other families, hardly. Basically ever. We were left in the dark. We were scared, and they did not help us.
Right, thank you. Thank you for answering so directly. Do you have any hopes for closure or the case in the future?
I have to. I can't give up on the idea that eventually they'll find him. It would tear me apart.
What do you think about... I've just noticed not many people around town want to talk about it. It almost feels like a secret within the community. How do you feel about that sort of reaction to this sort of tragedy?
Look, it's just the way some people grieve. They'd rather grieve in silence. Just because they don't want to answer interview questions doesn't mean they're trying to keep it a secret. You don't hear the conversations when 2 families get together. You don't hear what the members of those search parties say when they pass by each other on the street. Just because we don't sensationalize what happened doesn't mean we don't remember. It won't bring them back. I don't know what would, but all that media attention did was start rumors that hurt the investigation, not help it. That ridiculous idea that it's haunted. We prefer to deal with it in our community, with the people actually involved. It's something I have to think about every day. It's something we all think about every day. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you for listening to The Hurricane 5, produced by Manny Moore and Chris Beatty, with the help from Bill Durr and Mark Err. Written and narrated by me, Dan Sasso. Thanks for listening, everybody. Again, credits are all in the description. And again, for legal reasons, I am not sponsored by Simply Safe or Manscaped. Those are parodies. I think it seemed pretty clear, but just for legal reasons, I'm not sponsored. Okay, bye.